I can still feel the cold linoleum beneath my feet that afternoon, the house impossibly quiet, sunlight slicing across the hallway like it was warning me to turn back. But I kept walking, unaware that just a few steps ahead, my life was about to fracture. When I heard her voice, sharp and careless, tearing into the two people I loved most, it felt like the air was pulled straight out of my lungs. If you've ever trusted someone who hid a darker truth behind a perfect smile, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because you'll understand what came next. My hands trembled, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else, except the realization that the world I thought I knew was nothing but a mask. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I still remember the way the house felt that afternoon, unusually quiet, almost hollow, as I stepped inside earlier than anyone expected. I thought I would find a peaceful moment before starting dinner, but instead, I walked straight into the sound of my own world cracking open. From the hallway, I heard Harper's voice drifting through the living room, sharp, cold, nothing like the gentle tone she always used when she faced me. I froze before I even understood why. Then her words sank in, coated with contempt for me and a cruel dismissal of my son's worth, spoken as if his disability made him a burden she had been forced to carry. For a moment, my body simply refused to move. It felt as though the air thinned around me, pressing against my chest while my ears kept insisting this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was how she spoke when she thought no one could hear her. This was who she truly was. The realization hit harder than the words themselves. I had trusted her. I had welcomed her into our lives, believing she loved my boy the way he deserved to be loved. Standing there in the shadows, I felt something inside me tear, a mix of heartbreak, disbelief, and a rising sense that everything I thought I knew had been a lie. I backed away before she noticed me, but the damage was already done. That moment became the line between the life I had been living and everything that would come next. And to understand how deeply it shook me, you need to know who I was before everything began to fall apart. I wasn't born into comfort. My childhood in a small Ohio town was shaped by hand-me-down clothes, long winters, and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. I learned early that if I wanted anything to last, I had to build it myself. That lesson became the backbone of my life. In my 20s, I juggled night classes and double shifts until I finally saved enough to start a small catering business. It began in a cramped kitchen with secondhand equipment, but I treated every order like it mattered. Slowly, the referrals came, and with them a sense of pride I had never known. By the time I turned 30, that little business was supporting us comfortably. Losing my husband changed the shape of our family, but it never broke our resolve. My son became the center of every choice I made. I wanted him to grow up knowing stability, kindness, and the quiet strength that comes from getting back up after life tries to knock you down. Every late night, every early morning, every dollar saved. It was all for him. For a long time, I believed I had finally built a life that couldn't be shaken, a home filled with love, a business that provided for us, and a future that felt steady beneath our feet. But life has a way of shifting without warning, and just when I thought our hardest days were behind us, the moment arrived that would break everything wide open and lead us into the darkest chapter of all. It happened on a cold afternoon, the kind that settles into your bones without warning. I was in the middle of preparing a delivery order when my phone rang, and something in me knew before I even answered that my life was about to split in two. Hearing that my son had been in an accident on Interstate 90 felt like the ground opened beneath me. I remember grabbing my keys with shaking hands and driving without feeling the steering wheel, my mind trapped in a loop of terror I couldn't escape. The hospital lights were too bright, too clinical for the panic crushing my chest. Hours passed in a blur as I sat in that waiting room, praying for anything but the worst. Every time a nurse walked by, my heart kicked hard enough to hurt. When the doctor finally approached, his expression said everything before his words even reached me. My boy was alive, but the damage to his spine meant he would never walk again. I felt something inside me collapse. It was a quiet breaking, the kind that steals your breath and leaves you moving through the world like a shadow, through all of it. Harper stayed close. She held my arm, guided me through paperwork, whispered reassurances in a soft voice that made me believe we would face this together. I clung to that comfort because I needed something to hold on to. But looking back, that day didn't just change my son's life. It opened the first cracks in a truth I wasn't ready to see, cracks that would soon reveal who Harper really was. At first, I thought the changes in Harper were just exhaustion. We were all stretched thin after the accident, and grief has a way of rearranging people, but slowly, almost quietly, something in her began to shift. She moved through the house with a tension I couldn't name, her patience with Daniel thinning in ways she tried to hide but couldn't. I would catch her exhaling sharply when he needed help, or see her eyes glaze over when he tried to talk to her. They were tiny moments, easy to dismiss, yet each one settled into my chest like a stone. When Mark arrived as Daniel's new caregiver, I wanted to believe the relief on Harper's face was simply gratitude for extra help. But there was a brightness in her around him, a softness I hadn't seen in months. I noticed the way she lingered in the doorway when he joked about the weather, or how her shoulders relaxed when he walked in. It was subtle, nothing anyone else would have pointed out. But I felt it, a shift in the air whenever the two of them were in the same room. Then came the secrecy. Harper slipping her phone into her pocket when I walked by, late grocery runs that stretched far longer than they should have, evenings when she claimed she needed fresh air, yet returned with a flush that didn't match the temperature outside. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that stress was twisting my thoughts, but the guilt of even questioning her loyalty made me keep those doubts buried. What finally unsettled me was a neighbor's offhand comment about seeing Harper and Mark talking closely near his car, their faces far too familiar. It was the first time suspicion settled into certainty, and it was the moment I knew something deeper, something painful, was waiting for me just ahead. It started with something so small I almost brushed it aside. I was sorting the week's mail, trying to clear the counter the way I always did, when I noticed a credit statement addressed to Harper sitting beneath a stack of coupons. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't even suspicious that day. But the envelope felt heavier than usual, and when I opened it, I saw charges from a hotel 2 towns over, multiple dates, multiple stays, each one lining up with the nights she claimed she needed time alone or errands ran long. My stomach dropped, but I still tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a mistake, I told myself. Maybe someone stole her card. Yet as I searched for earlier statements, I found more receipts tucked into a drawer, gas charges far from home, dinners for 2, and a signed slip that didn't match her handwriting. It was a version of her name written with sharp, rushed strokes, almost like someone trying to imitate it. Then came the photos on her cloud account, half hidden but not deleted. Blurry shots of her and Mark standing too close, his hand hovering at her waist, her smile soft in a way I hadn't seen since before the accident. But the final blow came when I opened a medical document she left on the desk. It was a prenatal confirmation, and the dates were unmistakable. The timeline made one thing brutally clear: the baby she carried could not be my son's. My vision blurred as I stared at the page. It felt like the room tilted, like the oxygen had been pulled out of the air. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, demand honesty. But Daniel's safety came first. I knew if I exploded now, everything could spiral out of control. So I swallowed the fury burning through me and made myself breathe. I needed a plan. I needed a way out for both of us. 300 words. In the days that followed, the grief inside me hardened into something sharper. I no longer moved through the house in a daze. Every breath felt intentional. Every step taken with a purpose I hadn't known I still had. The moment I realized the truth about Harper and Mark, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for answers from them and started seeking protection for my son and myself. The first thing I did was call an attorney I hadn't spoken to in years. I kept my voice steady as I asked for guidance, explaining only what was necessary. From there, I hired a private investigator, someone who could look where I couldn't without alerting anyone. When the reports came back, they were worse than I imagined. There were fraudulent withdrawals tied to my accounts, property inquiries linked to Mark, and even drafts of paperwork showing plans to sell my home behind my back. There was also evidence of an offshore account they had opened together, as if they were building a life far away from the wreckage they were creating here. As I pieced everything together, I knew I couldn't keep any of this from Daniel. When I finally sat with him, he looked at me with a heaviness that told me he already sensed the truth, in a quiet, trembling confession. He shared moments he'd noticed, times Harper's warmth toward him felt forced, times he overheard her speaking in ways that cut him deeply. Hearing that nearly broke me again, but instead of shattering, something in both of us strengthened. We agreed without needing many words. We would not confront them. We would not give them a chance to twist the narrative. We would leave, quietly and decisively. And with that resolve, the first steps of our escape began to take shape. 200 words. We left before the sun even touched the windows. The house was still, holding its breath, as if it knew this was the last time we would ever move through it. I packed only what mattered: documents, a few clothes, the photo of Daniel smiling before the accident. Everything else, every piece of the life I built, stayed behind like a shell I no longer fit. Moving quietly, I helped Daniel into the specialized vehicle, lifting him with a mixture of tenderness and sorrow. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The way his hand rested on my arm told me he was ready, even if both of us were grieving what we were leaving. Before closing the door, I left a single letter on the kitchen table. Not an explanation, not an argument, just the truth I needed to release without giving anyone the chance to twist it. When we pulled away, the gravel crunching beneath the tires sounded like something breaking open inside me. Loss and freedom tangled together as the house disappeared in the rearview mirror. By the time we reached Santa Barbara, the sky had lifted into a clear blue. I stepped out of the car and felt, for the first time in months, the faintest breath of relief. It was the beginning of something new. 300 words. Those first days in Santa Barbara felt almost unreal, as if we had stepped into a quiet pocket of the world untouched by everything we had endured. The house we found was small, tucked beneath tall eucalyptus trees, and the silence around it wrapped itself around my nerves like a balm. For the first time in a long while, I woke without bracing myself for conflict. I could simply breathe. Daniel adjusted slowly, but I could see the change in him. The soft ocean air seemed to loosen something inside his shoulders, and the sunlight that filtered through his window each morning held a warmth I hadn't seen reach him in months. Even small routines, rolling him onto the patio, letting him feel the breeze, became quiet rituals of healing. Our neighbors introduced themselves in the most ordinary ways, which somehow made their kindness feel even more genuine. Margaret showed up with a plate of lemon bars, her voice gentle and her eyes filled with the kind of empathy that doesn't ask for explanations. Helen appeared a few days later with a stack of used books she thought Daniel might enjoy, and her easy laughter made the house feel less empty. These women didn't pry. They didn't tiptoe around our past or try to fill the silence with assumptions. They offered small acts of care, a warm meal, an extra set of hands, company during long afternoons, and those simple gestures began stitching together parts of me I thought were permanently torn. Little by little, we started to belong again. And as the weeks passed, I found myself feeling grateful in ways I hadn't expected. Grateful for the safety, the slowness, the gentle reminder that not every chapter begins in pain. But I didn't know then that peace, no matter how welcome, can still be fragile, and that our past was already on its way back to find us. 300 words. I wasn't expecting anyone that morning. So when I opened the door and saw Harper standing there, I felt the world tilt. She looked nothing like the woman who had once moved through my home with such sharp confidence. She was thin, unsteady on her feet, her skin carrying the pale exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a battle in silence. For a moment, I didn't recognize her at all. My first instinct was to shield Daniel, to keep the fragile peace we had built. But the look in her eyes stopped me, a mixture of sorrow, fear, and something that felt like surrender. She spoke haltingly, barely lifting her gaze, and the fragments of her story came out in pieces. She confessed that the life she had built with Mark had not been the escape she imagined. He had controlled her, isolated her, and turned her against us in ways she hadn't understood until it was too late. She told me she had tried to break away, only to discover she was gravely ill, with doctors giving her little time. She had come to us because she couldn't leave this world carrying the weight of what she had done. Hearing her remorse opened something inside me I didn't expect. I felt grief for the damage she caused, but also sorrow for the version of herself she never allowed me to see. Yet forgiveness wasn't something I could offer in that moment. The wounds were too deep, the memories too fresh. Before she left, she placed a sealed envelope on the table, her hand trembling as she set it down. She didn't explain it. She simply walked away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and unfinished. I knew opening that envelope would shift something in me again, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. 250 words? I learned about Harper's passing just a week after she appeared at my door. The news settled over me in a way I didn't expect. Quiet, heavy, and strangely tender. Even after everything, a life ending still felt like a weight the heart instinctively tries to hold. For days, the sealed envelope she left behind sat untouched on my dresser. When I finally opened it, I felt as if the air shifted around me. Inside was a handwritten letter, her words uneven and tired. She spoke of regret, of the choices that led her down a path she couldn't escape, and of the damage she caused without ever truly understanding the harm. She wrote about Mark's control, her fear, her shame, and her wish that she had seen Daniel for the gentle soul he always was. But what struck me most was the final page, documentation showing that she had donated everything she still owned to support our foundation, with a brief note asking that we use it to help others find strength she never found in time. I cried for her, not for the woman she became, but for the one she might have been if life had been kinder, if she had been braver sooner. That letter didn't erase the past, but it shifted something inside me. Daniel and I decided to expand the foundation, deepening our work in adaptive support and caregiver outreach. It felt like a way to turn all of this pain into something that could lift someone else. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace forming. I didn't know then that one more unexpected truth was still waiting for us. 200 words. A week after reading Harper's letter, I received a formal envelope from an attorney in Los Angeles. For a moment, my hands hesitated, unsure if I had the strength for another revelation. But when I opened it, the truth unfolded in a way I never expected. Harper had legally transferred the last of her assets and personal belongings to our foundation, leaving clear instructions that everything be used to support families navigating situations like ours. Attached was a brief note she had written before her final visit, explaining that she had severed all ties with Mark months earlier, long before she found the courage to face me. She wrote that she wanted to shield us from any further harm he might cause, even if it meant disappearing alone. As I read those words, a wave of emotion washed through me, grief, surprise, and an odd sense of peace. It didn't erase the betrayal or the pain, but it softened the edges. It showed me that even someone who had caused so much damage could still choose a final act of protection, a final attempt at grace. I realized then that closure doesn't always come cleanly. Sometimes it arrives in fragile gestures, in the quiet aftermath of someone's last attempt to make things right. And with that understanding, I felt myself ready to reflect on everything that had led us here. 150 words, looking back on everything we lived through, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the rebuilding. I'm reminded of how unpredictable healing can be. Pain reshaped our lives, but it didn't end them. It carved out room for strength I didn't know I had, for a deeper bond with Daniel, and for a purpose that grew from the ashes of what we lost. Even Harper's final choices, complicated as they were, taught me that people can change in ways we never expect, even at the very end. If there's one thing I carry forward, it's that resilience isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet decision to keep going, to choose hope, to build something better from what was broken. Thank you for listening to our story. If any part of this touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey, I hope you'll share it in the comments. I read every one,